Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Well, I'm not in the vegetable garden today. I'm actually out in the middle of our lavender patch, which of course looks pretty sad by the end of the summer. But I'm going to show you how to propagate your own lavender plants from cuttings. It is incredibly easy. We did it for the first time this year and I am so tickled with the results. Now, ordinarily, this is what this lavender patch looks like at the peak of bloom. There are about 300 plants in this lavender patch. We live on 5 acres in Spokane, Washington, so we're in a rural area, and on this side of our driveway, it always used to look kind of messy, and I thought, what could we put over here that would be drought tolerant, deer resistant, and low maintenance especially, because I was tired of pulling weeds over here. And so, of course, the first thing we thought of was lavender because it meets all of those criteria. Well, that was over 20 years ago, and we've been noticing in the last few years that our lavender plants are not looking so great. It turns out that most lavender plants really only live and look exceptional for about 15 years, maybe 20 if you're lucky, and so we realized it is time for us to put in some new plants. Well, when you multiply anything by 300, that is a heck of a lot of money. And I kept seeing on British gardening programs that it's easy to take cuttings. So that's what Bill and I did. And we are amazed at how easy it has been. Now here in our Zone 5B garden, the lavender is at its peak of bloom from June to July, and it is absolutely glorious. I just love it. But it has side benefits as well. First of all, it attracts bees and other types of pollinators, so butterflies and other beneficial insects that you want to have in your garden. And it also feeds the birds during the winter. And you're probably thinking, well, how is that possible? Well, what happens is that there are seeds from the flower heads, and during the winter months, the birds will come and eat those seeds, so they're getting nutrition from them. And the coolest thing that happens is in the middle of winter, where the snow is up to our knees, you can come out and you smell the scent of lavender because of the birds' activity with eating those seeds. It is the neatest thing. So I just love having them in the garden. Now, Bill, in the springtime, cuts down the flowers using a battery-powered hedge trimmer, which goes pretty well, although certainly it takes a while. But we've got a lot of dead branches on them now that we need to hand prune out. I'm just dreading that. And there are some plants that just plain need to go. So back in late May, we decided to give it a go and take cuttings from the lavender plants. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, to take the lavender cuttings, you need the following high-tech equipment: a Ziploc freezer bag and a pair of scissors. Like I said, high-tech. So the purpose of this bag is that this is where you're going to place your cuttings as soon as you take them. And that way they will not lose any moisture, because you do not want that to happen if you want to be successful at propagating things. Now here's a plant that we definitely will be replacing. You can see there is so much dead wood on it. And so to take the cutting, you want to look for a stem that does not have a flower at the top, and then cut it at maybe about a 5 or 6 inch length. So there is a cutting. I'll take this other one right next door. There's no flower on the top of that one. Here's another good one. Here's another good one. Now, before I show you how to get your cuttings to root, I wanted to show you what the status is of the cuttings that we took in late May. So here are 5 pots of cuttings, and I think they look fantastic. I am so excited about this. So they started out in a big flat with 1 per cell. And then when I could see roots coming out of the bottom of the cells, I up-potted them to these 4-inch pots. I really want to get them off to a good start with a good root system. So what I'm going to do is keep them indoors under a grow light for the winter, which I know sounds like a bit of a pain, and then plant them out in spring. So that's the game plan. We have approximately 45 cuttings and they all look like this. How cool is that? Free plants, you guys. Okay, let's get those cuttings potted up. So I needed a few supplies to get started. First of all, I took about 12 cuttings. So I have 2 pony packs that have 6 cells each, so that will accommodate all of the cuttings. I filled it with lightly moistened germination mix or seed starting mix. You could also use a potting mix. I do not recommend using garden soil because it can contain pathogens and you want your cuttings to get off to the best start possible. You also want to have a rooting hormone. This is very easy to find at garden centers. It's not terribly expensive and a little goes a very long way. I've had this probably for years now. The important thing you need to know is that, first of all, you want your cuttings to get a good root system, and that's what this rooting hormone is for. The other thing is you do not want to dip your cuttings directly into this container. Instead, just shake out what you think you'll need and put it into a separate container that you're only using for this purpose. I also have a chopstick, and that is going to help me make a little cylindrical hole to carefully slip the cuttings into once they've been prepared and dipped in the rooting hormone. So I don't want to just push them into the soil because then I'll probably lose a lot of the rooting hormone off of those tips of the cuttings. Before I proceed, I wanted to clarify that you can take lavender cuttings from spring to fall. The springtime cuttings will be softwood cuttings, while the later cuttings will be woody. I've heard that the woody cuttings more reliably root, but I'm sure happy with how well the softwood cuttings rooted for us. Now the first thing I did with the cutting is I stripped off the majority of the leaves. The reasoning behind that is the more leaves you have on a cutting, the more the cutting will lose moisture, and you don't want that to happen. So when we took cuttings in the spring, the stems were what are called semi-ripe, where they are green but they're sturdy, whereas now that I'm taking this to demonstrate this to you later in the season, these are more of a woody or stiff type of a stem. Fortunately, the method is exactly the same, so you don't need to worry about that. The other thing I want to do, again, to prevent moisture loss, is I'm going to cut these leaves in half. And I know that seems drastic, but that is a very good idea. So yeah, it doesn't look like much, but we'll end up with a nice plant from that. The next step is to dip the bottom tip of the cutting into the rooting hormone, and then this is where the chopstick comes in handy because I'm just making a hole larger than the diameter of the cutting to carefully slip the cutting into, and then press the soil around the stem of the cutting. Looks like a little Christmas tree. Now here are some photos from our spring propagation project, and you'll notice that the cuttings look a lot greener and lusher than these more woody cuttings. These are the cuttings that I just potted up. The next step in the process is to either place them into a clear plastic bag or into a flat that you cover with a clear plastic dome lid. This will keep the cuttings reasonably moist so they can start developing a root system. You also want to locate them where they'll get some indirect light. This photo shows what we did for our spring propagation project. It generally takes about a month for the roots to develop. You can test this by very gently pulling the cutting upward. If there's no resistance, there are no roots yet. If there is resistance, the cutting is forming roots. At that point, you can remove the plastic bag or dome cover. Be sure to keep the soil lightly moist, definitely not sopping wet. When you see roots coming out of the bottom of the container, it's time to up-pot them to a slightly larger one. And that's all there is to it. Propagation is something that I have to admit I've really never done that much of, other than dividing plants or starting plants from seed. So taking cuttings is opening up a whole new world for me. And I intend to shoot a bunch of videos on it next year because I think it is such a great topic. We all love to save money, right? So if you see a plant in your friend's garden and they say, yeah, take some cuttings of it, go for it. Maybe you have one plant of something and you want more of them. Propagation is the key. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope it will motivate you to go out there and take lavender cuttings and get them started, baby them over the winter, and then plant them with great joy in the garden in spring. Now, I have also been taking cuttings of hydrangeas this year, and so I'll report more on that later. Happy gardening, everybody.